This program is brought to you by Connie Dodo of Connie Dodo Realty Group, 119 Pleasant Street, Methuen. When you want results, don't make a move without us.
Welcome to Dodo Real Estate View. I'd like to thank the viewers for giving us topics that you'd like to see on our upcoming shows, and continue to do that. And your questions that you have are really exceptional. We have a question at the end of our show, and it's obviously a real estate question. So if you would continue to either call us or email us with those questions, that's great. I'd like to welcome today Susan Ciccanesi, who's the owner of Susan Ciccanesi law firm, and she's located in New Hampshire. She's licensed in Mass and New Hampshire. Thank you for coming, Susan.
Thank you for having me today, Connie.
Yeah, it's great. We're going to talk real estate. Obviously, we're going to talk about, the importance of people having a well-rounded real estate attorney when they do a transaction. But a little bit on Susan's background. Like I said, she's licensed in Mass and New Hampshire, and she brings a wealth of knowledge. She's been practicing since 1998, and she owns her own firm. She's had many jobs that have given her opportunities to progress to that point of being an independent owner here. So maybe if you could tell us where you're located, your website and so forth, so people will know how to get in touch with you, and we can put that on the tape as well.
Of course. My office is located in Hampton, New Hampshire, and my phone number is 603-601-7619. And I have a brand new website, which I'm really excited about, and it's www.ciccanesi-law.com. So it's my last name, Ciccanesi-law.com. And as you said, I practice both in New Hampshire, where I'm located, but also in Massachusetts.
Yeah, which is wonderful. I know it's always tough when you get a website. Sometimes we make them long, but if you keep it your last name, I think that's fitting that people won't forget that. So I know Ciccanesi's a tongue twister. It's a little
but
tough
it's hard to forget, right?
You don't forget it. You don't forget it, that's for sure. So I know that, there's a lot of different types of laws and practices that you have to do both in Mass and New Hampshire. I think one thing is people always say is, why do I have to hire a real estate attorney if I'm a seller? Do you think that people should, or what's the...
As opposed to a general practitioner?
Correct.
I think that's a great question, and I think the best analogy that I would use would be kind of translated into the medical field. So if you have a skin condition like acne, severe acne, or psoriasis, you could go to your general practitioner, your PCP, but more than likely you're going to want to go to a specialist in that field, like a dermatologist. You know that person's going to give you the most in-depth exam and also probably the best course of treatment. So I kind of would compare that to a real estate attorney. You could definitely go to your local attorney who has an office down the corner in your hometown, and he or she, I'm sure, would be more than knowledgeable about working in the field of real estate. But if you go to a specialist like a real estate attorney for real estate matters, that person works on these types of matters and issues relating to real estate every day. They know the ins and the outs, and they're not reinventing the wheel every time they have a new client that comes to them looking for answers.
Right. And I think, you see it when you deal with other, I'm sure, real estate attorneys that are not in that, they're not specialty, that's not their field.
You can tell right away.
Right, you can tell, and it's like the questions they ask. And I know when I've done deals that that it's a general attorney, and it's like, you're really, we always prefer to have two attorneys that are from the same specialty deal with it, because it goes smoother.
We speak the same language,
right,
too.
You're right, and it doesn't always, work that way when people are, like you said, the specialties. How would a person select a real estate attorney? What's the best way or approach for them to get to a good real estate attorney?
I always think that the best referrals come from people that you trust. And in real estate, I would suggest that you contact your realtor, the realtor that you know and trust. That person works daily with other attorneys, with attorneys in the area. They know who the local people are, and they know how they stand up against their competitors. So whether it be your realtor that you work with or another trusted professional, always get a referral. Those seems to be the best leads, and they'll always put you in the right direction with someone that they trust and they're comfortable with as well.
Or it could be the mortgage or the lender you're working with.
Certainly, they will always have people that they work
Yep.
with daily too. And sometimes they will tell you a handful or a few closing attorneys, title attorneys that they work with, and certainly feel free to take their lead and use whoever they're referring to you. But also, if you do have a realtor who knows other attorneys in the area, certainly feel free to ask them as well.
And I mean, that leads me into a lot of times that people say, you don't need, the mortgage company has an attorney. You really don't need to have an attorney as a seller or another attorney if the lender has one.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant theme you hear.
I run up against that all the time too.
So
I try to educate people a lot that a buyer or a borrower in a refinance, if that's the case, they always have the choice as to who they want their title attorney or their closing attorney to be. And I use those terms interchangeably, closing attorney versus title attorney. You do have the choice. Many times, the lender that you go to, the branch manager of the lending institution that you go to, will have a few closing attorneys that they work with frequently. And they will kind of by natural course put you in that direction and say, oh, I typically use ABC Law Firm for my closings. That's who I'm going to have as your closing attorney. And that's perfectly fine, and that's acceptable, and it's daily practice. But if you have someone that you'd like to use specifically, or if someone is referred to you as a closing attorney, certainly at the very onset of your application process for your loan, whether it be a refinance or a purchase, just let your loan officer or banking representative know that you have your own closing attorney that you would like to use. That way you'll feel very comfortable through the process.
And I know times that they'll have to get the attorney on the list. If it's not already on, if you're not already on their list, okay.
They'll tell you that
Yep.
too, and that sounds like a daunting process to be put on the list of the lending institution, but really, it's just a paperwork process, and the attorney will answer some questions and maybe provide some documentation to make sure that the lender is comfortable with their practices.
A lot of times when people close on properties, there's that title insurance that is a big one. I mean, it's a question that I constantly get, and I'm sure you get that as well. Maybe if you could talk a bit about, I know lenders typically will require it. Maybe if we kind of go through that, and then if sellers or buyers want to purchase their own title insurance.
Sure.
People always get confused with that. And what is title insurance? What does it cover?
Probably that's the first question too that I'd like to address. What is title
Right.
insurance? Title insurance is similar to a policy of life insurance that you would purchase, so to speak. The actual document is a policy, and it's in a jacket. You receive it. It's a physical thing, and you put it in with your important documents just as you would with your life insurance policy. What it is, it's a protection against possible harm or possible challenges to your ownership of the property. And there's two types. There's an owner's type of policy, and then there's a lender's policy. An owner's policy is something that the buyer would purchase to protect their rights in the property in case anyone challenges their legal rights of ownership to the property. You have that policy of protection. The lender will also have a type of policy called a lender's policy of insurance. And it seems backwards, but the owner or the borrower for a refinance transaction will purchase for the lender that policy of insurance for the bank's protection. And what happens is if there's a challenge to your ownership rights to the property, that company, it's the carrier will step in and defend any action or any claim made against you as to ownership rights of the property.
Okay. A lot of people say, well, can't my insurance company purchase that? I mean, I get that. The title insurance, it's like, well, I can get my insurance company to do that.
It's another language,
Right,
the whole title
right.
in title insurance, and unfortunately they're not in the business of issuing title insurance. In order to purchase title insurance, you'll need to go through a closing attorney or directly through a title insurance carrier, depending on where you live. So unfortunately, you can't go to your neighborhood insurance company and knock on the door and say, oh, I'd like to purchase title insurance. Can you help me with that? They won't be able to help you.
Right. And I do get that question. People have said, well, I have my insurance company to do that. I said, to try to explain it to people, it's always best for the attorney to go over it. So a lot of people get confused with that, so that's a good explanation. You know, we talk about title insurance, we've dealt with that, but what does it mean to take title to a property?
Well, what is title? When it's kind of
Right,
a vague word,
right.
right? Title is, if you could consider it a bundle. If you hold a bundle of rights in your hands, it's the ownership, it's the possession, it's how you use the property, it's any easements that you hold in the property. That whole bundle is called title, and it's how you hold title is by virtue of a deed. So the instrument that we use to give someone title to the property is with the deed, which everyone, I'm sure, has heard that term used, a deed. We record it at the Registry of Deeds, and once it's recorded, you are the legitimate owner of that property.
A lot of people understand the word deed. Sometimes the title gets confusing. They're taking, like you said, possession.
Yeah, it's an abstract thought, so to speak, but if you consider it the whole realm of your ownership of the property, any possession rights that you have, any equitable interest in the property, as well as any easements, it's the entire bundle of rights that you own in that property.
I know we're kind of bouncing around from different things, but I think in terms of taking somebody through as a real estate attorney, the process of once somebody finds a property, you know, a customer finds a property, everything's done, so then the next step, and talk about the different state processes. I mean, Massachusetts, it's different than New Hampshire.
Sure.
So,
You want to talk about the process in
I
Massachusetts?
mean, I think we'll start there in Mass,
Maybe
and
you
then
can
we
jump
talk.
into where maybe from the real estate perspective.
Yeah.
So once someone is interested in a property, once they're working with the realtor to find a property that they like, they will put an offer on the property to purchase it through their realtor, with their realtor. And then once that is accepted, once the offer is accepted by the seller, then the purchase and sale agreement will be drafted and reviewed by both parties, by an attorney for the buyer as well as an attorney for the seller and the parties themselves. And that's reviewed by both attorneys and discussed between both parties. And once it's signed and executed, you have a fully consummated contract that will be the basis of the transaction.
And a lot of people get confused with too, in Massachusetts, an offer is a legally binding document as well.
Sure thing, yeah.
People always say, well, I signed an offer. They think purchase and sale is just that, so.
Yeah, you need to go to the next step of protecting your rights and really describing what your rights are in that purchase and sale agreement.
So we get to the purchase and sale that you've already done, where we're at the point, we're going to the closing table. So what happens at the closing table? I mean, I think it's, you know, that's where the attorneys really take over and
well, there's a lot
run the
behind the
show.
scenes to that the borrower or the buyer really doesn't see, which is the nuts and bolts of what someone like I do as a closing attorney and a real estate attorney. But if we're representing the buyer and acting as the bank's counselor or the closing attorney, we need to make sure that the bank is getting good title to the property, that the buyers are getting good title to the property. There aren't any liens that are out there that will jeopardize the bank's interest in extending money, or any liens out there or interest that would jeopardize the owner's rights to the property. So once we do all that research, we provide the information to the bank and to the buyer, and we get to the closing table and we sit down with all of the bank's documents, and what a closing attorney would do is review those documents with the buyer or the borrower on a refinance transaction. And sometimes there's 100 documents there at the closing table, and we sit and
it's like too much paper, too much.
and it's daunting for a typical consumer who doesn't see it on a daily basis. So they really need to be explained what those terms mean and what those documents mean, because it's really a foreign language to those people who don't see that on a daily basis.
And I think a lot of people at the closing table, they get confused with, you know, these taxes that have carried over from the seller that they've paid. I mean, that's always an issue.
Taxes, yes. Taxes are interesting in the state of Massachusetts. Taxes are paid quarterly in the state of Massachusetts, and they cover a month before or a month prior and a month after. So if you pay a November tax bill that's due on November 1st, it covers from the time from October 1st through December 31st. So if you're purchasing a piece of property and you're closing on, let's say, November 10th, A closing attorney will want to apportion the taxes. She'll want to make sure that the most recent tax bill, that November tax bill, has been paid, in an effort to be fair, to make sure that the seller is reimbursed for what they've already paid for. The closing attorney will apportion the real estate taxes as of the date of closing. So what that means is that the closing attorney will say, all right, we're closing on November 10th. That means that we need to have the buyer give a credit to the seller from November 10th through December 31st, if we're using my scenario of November 1st being the tax bill. That way, the buyer is giving to the seller a credit and the seller is made whole, so that they're not spending money for the buyer's benefit of using that tax time.
I mean, that always seems to be a real confusing issue when you're sitting at the closing table, that the buyers have difficulty wrapping their head around it.
It's always a question.
Yeah,
It's always a
seems
question,
to
and
be.
it deserves a proper explanation.
Right,
for sure.
and how you explained it makes perfect sense. I've seen some attorneys that, again, are not real estate attorneys, that they look at you like, okay, what and it's like the other, they're looking, hopefully if the seller's attorney's there for them to explain it. So, a lot of people don't understand, as you do, the difference with the taxes.
Well, a good real estate attorney is prepared. I think preparedness is one thing that really sets someone apart from a general practitioner, but in terms of a real estate transaction, you're always going to need to prepare. Review the documentation that the lender has given you to the buyer, but also attention to detail. That's something that's kind of ingrained in us as closing attorneys, but you always have to pay attention to detail and be able to explain those details to the parties to the transaction. Because there's nothing worse than being at a closing table and having, and I'm sure you've seen it happen, have a surprise come out of the woodwork, and then it just stops the process, and then there's an issue.
Right. The difference in the New Hampshire process, I mean,
New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and for us and those viewers who are sitting on the border between the two states, we may see Massachusetts closing attorneys, or you may have a title attorney in New Hampshire if you're moving over the border. It's a little bit of a different practice. In New Hampshire, realtors spend a lot of their time, and it's fully acceptable practice, negotiating the purchase and sale agreement. And that's the custom and the practice there. Not that attorneys don't get involved, but typically they don't.
sometimes you do. I've had some transactions where before somebody will sign that purchase and sale, they'll want the attorney look at it. So, I mean, you do occasionally, but for the most part, they will. But you're right, it's totally different than Mass, where it goes to offer and then to PNS. But
where in Massachusetts, the attorney representing the buyer and the attorney representing the seller will negotiate with one another the terms of the purchase and sale agreement. And as I said, in New Hampshire, the realtors tend to do that by themselves, which is, again,